Okay, hello everyone. I am Kelly Swayze, the Diversity and Inclusion Liaison for Fulbright programs in East Asia and the Pacific. My pronouns are she, her. And just to give a short description of myself, I'm a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a black shirt, sitting in front of a white wall, and I have these dark frame hipster glasses on. Welcome to the second EAP Occasional Seminar of 2022. These seminars are basically aimed at featuring speakers who share their expertise on topics of inclusion, diversity, and access. The seminars really aim to engage staff at commissions and posts and partner organizations in discussion about contemporary theories of DE&I and the narratives, challenges, and advancements that shape the perspectives and concerns of Fulbright program participants, both from the US and our program participants who are going to the US from the EAP region. So tonight I will give the floor to our speaker for approximately 30 minutes to present, and then I'll open the floor for questions and discussions. And if you'd like to pose a question while Dr. Dian is presenting, please feel free to type it into the chat box and I will convey it to her after she's finished presenting. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dian Mawene. Dr. Dian Mawene is an assistant professor of special education at the University of New Hampshire. Her research and teaching interests focus on the intersection of disability, race, class, and space. Dr. Mawene works with students, parents, and community members to understand the local context of racial disproportionality in educational opportunities and outcomes. Her work focuses on creating access for people from historically marginalized backgrounds. And an emerging new line of study she's interested in establishing is teacher preparation programs towards having justice-oriented teaching forces. Dr. Mawene grew up in Indonesia and was a Fulbright foreign language teaching assistant in 2011. It was her experiences as an FLTA that sparked her interest in disability studies, leading her to continue learning about the intersectionality of disabilities and pursue her doctoral studies in special education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I would just like to say this is a really special EAP occasional seminar for me. I met Dian at University of New Hampshire this past March. We didn't actually know each other previous to this, and I was absolutely thrilled to find that someone in the Fulbright program from the Indonesian community was now teaching where I went to school for my undergraduate degree in anthropology. And not only that, where I got my start working with the Indonesian communities from Eastern Indonesia that later became my master's and PhD program and was the focus of my own Fulbright. So it's just a beautiful example of how the Fulbright program makes these connections that just reverberate through time. And in addition to that, Dian's uncle is a colleague of mine here in Indonesia. So, it's just this really beautiful small world of scholars and activists and people that come together through the Fulbright program. And it's very special for me to be able to introduce Dr. Dian Mawene tonight. So Dian, I'm turning the floor over to you. Silicon.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That's such a beautiful, very comprehensive introduction. Thank you again. And yes, while you were talking, I was like, literally, Fulbright bridges the world because, yeah, I knew you from your work on social media, and then got to meet you the 2 or 3 months ago in New Hampshire, and here we are, right? So thank you. Let me quickly introduce myself. So my name is Dian Mawene. I'm a female, dark brown skin with curly hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm also wearing a green shirt, and behind me is a background of window on my left side, and then a wall, and then another mirror on my right side, and there is a plant hanging on top of me. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone. It's night in Indonesia, so thank you for tuning in, and also for people who, wherever you are in whatever part in the world, thank you so much for joining. So as Kelly mentioned, I am a product of Fulbright. I was a Fulbright FLTA more than a decade ago. Yes. Yeah. 10 years, 11 years ago. And so I think just a little bit background. I did not have, my undergrad was in English language teaching, but I have taught individuals with disabilities. I had one student with ADHD, one student with autism back when I was in Indonesia. And I think although I was in the FLTA program, FLTA gave a chance to sit in or audit 2 courses. And one of those 2 courses that I enrolled actually led me to my PhD program. So yeah, long story short, so, you know, I told people like, you can be serious in your, you know, audit classes too. And then, you know, it could be a stepping stone for you. Anyway, questions, comments, anybody would like to chime in? It's good to see people, familiar names and faces here. Kelly, since there are only like 6 of us, do you mind if we do like, I know like these are like our fellow MNF people, but I would love to just hear them quickly introduce their name. Was that okay, Kelly?
Absolutely. You're on spotlight, but they can still unmute themselves and say hi. So go right ahead.
Perfect. Is that okay for, you know, for you to just quickly say your name, where you are? Yeah, that would be good, because kayak Indonesians usually say tak kenal tak sayang, yeah. So I think it would be nice since this is just 6 of us, and I think, you know, we can have like some sort of like intimate, informal conversations too. So go ahead.
Okay, let me start. Hello, Dian. Wow, it's very nice to see you here. I recall that, yeah, we met the first time in 2010, I believe, during the FLTA program. So I was with MNF already. So it's good to see you. So yeah, now I am with the MNF Communications team. Happy to see you, and always exciting to see you and your story through your post on social media.
Thank you, Mbak Mita. But Maya, would you mind going next? I'm just going through, you know, whomever I see on the list here.
Hello, of course. I just didn't want us Jakartans to hog the conversation here. I believe Isabel is from the Fulbright Commission in Korea. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, I just didn't.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I just didn't want to do this Jakarta thing. So, but thank you. Hello, Dian. Greetings from Jakarta. I joined MNF in 2017. So your fellowship predates my joining the happy family of MNF. It's always great, as Kelly mentioned, and this lasting connections of Fulbrighters. It is a great story to tell, and I'm hoping that we could have an opportunity to publish your story with Kelly. You know, the connections and the work that takes you to share knowledge across countries. That's always gratifying, and that's what we here at MNF Communications strive to do. So I hope one of these days, when you have a moment, I'm sure Kelly and you are busy, but when you have a moment, then we could have a story, an article about it. That would be great. So thanks again, and hello to everyone. Quickly, Anita is also from our communications, but I think she's not at home, or she's not at office. She's traveling, so I'm not sure whether she should be able to turn on her video or say hello. Otherwise, you get background noise of her travel background noise.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mbak Maya. Could you remind me again of like the division of MNF where you are? Like, what do you do at MNF?
I'm I'm with the communications team.
Oh, okay.
So in 2017, MNF set up a dedicated communications team. Before that, there wasn't one. So I am in that team together with Mita and Anita. And so what we do is we the objective of us is to spread the word about MNF and Fulbright Indonesia, so that at the end of the day, we recruit diverse, qualified applicants. We highlight, amplify profiles and stories and achievements and updates of alumni. So that's why I referred to earlier about your story and Kelly's story. We manage an online database of alumni, both Indonesian and American Fulbrighters to Indonesia. So that's accessible on our website. We do outreach to applicants, Indonesian that is. We do events, public and private events, like being internal events, for instance, pre-departure orientation. We manage materials for the programs, to promote the programs, collaterals, all materials related to promoting the programs and the alumni.
Thank you.
I think that covers the gist of it.
Yeah,
and of course, we manage our social media platforms and our website.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Maya. It's good to know what people do. So, if, we can think of like when I don't know, share what I have, and, people can think of how they could be, what the current practices are in terms of being inclusive, right, to people of, diverse disabilities or abilities, and, what might be like future steps that you could do to create more access to people, sort of say.
Yes.
Thank you, Maya. Isabel, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm an associate program officer with Fulbright Korea, as Maya said earlier. I primarily work with the ETA team, and so, it's the counterpart of the FLTA program. I've been with the commission now for 3 years. I came on staff in 2019, and I was an ETA myself for 2 years before that, so from 2017 to 2019. So I have a little bit of the grantee experience in Korea, and then I have the administrative side in the office.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Isabel, and Anita, also thank you for joining us. Take care while you're traveling. I hope you're not driving. All right.
Dian, I think you've
we've
accidentally
lost your sound.
You've muted yourself.
Muted. I am muted. Yes, I thought that I'm good at it after 2 years in the pandemic and using Zoom, but I'm not. So, so here I am. All right, I'm gonna share my slides real quick. I don't have many of them, and I'm hoping that the slides could be just sort of become a kind of like facilitate us in our in our conversation later. So I don't think I'm gonna take like those 30 minutes, Kelly, if that's okay. I'm trying to limit myself in like 20 minutes or so that we can have discussions. All right.
The floor is yours.
All right. So could you all see? Can you all see my screen? It's a white screen with black font writing. The title is Identifying Barriers to Access. Could you see that?
Not yet.
I can't see the screen yet.
You cannot see the screen yet. All right, interesting. All right, let me. Okay, give me 1 second.
Sure.
All righty.
It's working now.
It's working now. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm trying to identify, because I grew up in Indonesia too, but I haven't been to Indonesia in a while. And so I think my knowledge on how Indonesian has changed is probably not as comprehensive as folks here. I haven't been to Korea too, but it would be nice also to see, you know, the perspective of how ability and disability is conceptualized or materialized in Indonesia and in Korea. So, okay, I also meant to say that my perspectives here, whatever that I'm saying here, my perspective to disability comes from the work that I do. So I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher, educator. I'm a teacher of students with disabilities, but I don't identify myself as an individual with disability. So my perspective probably gonna be different from people with disabilities themselves, right? So I just wanna let you know that. So when Kelly asked me to give this talk about, you know, how to be or how to help the program managers or at the East Asia and Pacific, and you know how to be inclusive in the recruitment process and things like that. And it took me a while to actually think that why is that? So why that we're not being inclusive, and what is inclusive, right? And so that leads me to think that first of all, I think I'm going to just move to my next slide, but the world is designed and operate based on the notion that everyone is able to body and mind, that the standard is people sort of like we have this like normalized standard of, you know, you use your 5 senses, your sight, your hearing and things like that. So that's what we call as ableism, because the world operates based on certain standards of people with, we call able-bodied and mind, right? However, it isn't actually the case, because like 15% of the world populations are actually people with disabilities. So as being minority, 15% of the total world population is quite big, actually. So what I'm saying here is that although the world operates based on these notions of centralized around this abled body and mind, disability is actually a natural part of being human. It's this natural human experience, right? What it means is that our brain function, our behavioral traits, right? Those are simply indicators of how diverse our human population is, right? So disability is not a deviant actually, because we are all just temporarily able-bodied and mind, right? Some people get their disability when they're born, but some people acquire their disability later in life, right? Like, for example, knock on the wood, but like if you get hit by a car or something like that, if you know, just somehow your body is telling you different way, then, you know, you're gonna function differently, right? And so I think it's not a deviant to have a disability, right? One of my favorite scholar, maybe some of you know, Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky says that, well, having an impairment, by impairment mean if you lose your limbs, for example, like the picture, the picture I showed of the kid holding a pencil on his leg. So having an impairment is one thing, but being disabled is another thing. So they both are meaning different things, right? Someone can have completely full body organs. There's no physical impairment, there's no body impairment, but that person could be disabled, right? So for example, let me ask you all, how many of you here know how to speak sign language in whatever context that you are? Can you speak? Kelly, do you know sign language, American Sign Language, or I don't know, whatever sign language?
I do not know sign language.
So say, Isabel, do you know sign language? Yeah, okay.
I only know how to do the ABCs.
You only know how to do ABCs. All right. Thank you, Isabel. So say you don't know how to speak sign language, and sign language is a language, just like English, Indonesian, or Korean, right? And if I threw you at like Martha's Vineyard, for example, and everyone's there, use sign language, right? You don't have impairment, right? Because you have ears, you have eyes, your complete 5 senses are working, but because somehow you are just disabled, you cannot communicate with people at Martha's Vineyard because you don't share the same way of making senses there, right? Which in this case, using the sign language. So in that case, you might be disabled because you cannot interact, you cannot understand what the heck is going on there, right? And so again, what I'm saying is that impairment and disabilities are completely different things. And often disability is caused by the way that the lack of accessibility and lack of access is not just, inherent. Disability does not come inherently from someone's incomplete body functions or inability to regulate emotions or the way that their brain just doesn't work the same way as able people than mine do. Does that make sense? Yeah, so another thing also that about disability as being a natural part of human diversity is that not everyone wants to be cured. Not every disability can be cured, one, and not everyone wants to be cured. And so like, for example, say we have ADHD or we have autism, for example. Some people I know, they said, like, if if this is a Matrix movie and you're given a rat pill to take it, and then someone, your disability can be cured instantly. That person said that I won't take it because who I am is because of my disability. So my disability is an intact part of me as a human being, as this unique individual person, right? But the only thing, although disability is a natural part, again, like I said, our world is organized, our world is operated based on these notions of centralized around this able-bodied and mind. Access to opportunities, including, for example, education, or as simple as sidewalk, right? As simple as bus ride, are not made with people with disabilities in mind, because again, it's centralized around this notions of ableism, right? And so again, this isn't a problem of just 300 years ago. This isn't a problem of yesterday. This is an ancient historical problem, right? People with disabilities are often thought as burdened if we talk about the slash hunting gathering communities, disabled people are usually just killed or just left if they have to run away from enemies and things like that. So it's a historical problem. It's since the world is made, that has always been like that, right? So how does ableism oops, let's see. Oh, I do have a few more things here. All right. How does ableism actually take place, right? So if you think at institutional level, for example, how often our homes are equipped with stairs, right, or steps. When and I'm just talking about like feasible sort of like disabilities, right? We don't have ramps in many places, for example, or even when we have ramps, they are for compliance to policies, compliance to authority, but they don't really serve the functions of people with disabilities, right? So that is an example of like how pervasive ableism is in our life. So it's so thick in our blood and our skin that's just the norm of how things should operate, right? So that's an example that I just mentioned, is at the institutional level. But if we think also, another example at institutional level is, like, for example, when you go to restaurants and the way that restaurants are arranged, for example, like, just think about just physical settings, right? On the distance of between chairs. Does that allow people with different disabilities or abilities to actually navigate just the physical settings of the restaurants, right? If you have someone who's blind, or you have someone who uses wheelchair, would it be easy for them to navigate spaces in restaurant, right? And we're just talking about just physical space. A lot of times our written forms of things, like things as simple as menus at restaurants, we don't have Braille, for example. And again, I think the argument is, well, how many people are going to use this, but that you don't know how many people are going to use until you actually put it, right? And so it's not just the matter of adds on thing, or like, yeah, we're going to add that, when there is a need, but it has to be something that is built in within our infrastructure, right? So any questions first on these notions of ableism before we move on?
Dian, can I just, I'm getting a view of your screen that is showing me like the narrative version. Would you try hitting the use slideshow to see if it can make the slides bigger? Because it's a bit hard to see just because they're small.
Did you see my notes as well?
A little bit on the side, yeah, but we can see the screen and the slide and the notes.
Oh God, sorry about that.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna just stop I should have asked you from the beginning. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I use double screen here, and it seems like I was sharing the first screen, not the second one. Is this better?
I'm not seeing anything yet.
Oops. Definitely, I do not know how to use Zoom.
I totally understand that feeling. Okay, so now we're seeing the slideshow with there we go. Okay, so now it's on ableism. Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So any thoughts, any questions on ableism first before we move on? I'm just going to stop sharing right now. Now, can I ask a quick question? So I was just mentioning about ableism as the way that the world organizes this, able-bodied. We have this one standard, right? And that's basically, able-bodied. So, and I mentioned an example at the institutional level. How about in your daily life? I'm asking about this cultural level of ableism. Have you observed the way that perhaps you take things for granted or something like that at the cultural level that actually shows the practice of ableism? And by ableism, I mean also not being inclusive to people with disabilities. Any example of ableism at cultural level?
I mean, I can give a quick example just from today. I was traveling back from Jakarta, and I have a bit of a knee problem right now. So this has put me into this position where, yeah, something where I'm normally able-bodied and everything just seems easy. I was struggling, and I was watching around me that especially in travel in Indonesia, it's very crowded. It's very sort of impatient. And people are jostling in front of each other, and there's no assistance for someone who maybe, needs additional help just to get through security. And just the act of traveling from one place to another could be so overwhelming. I think if you had any kind of impairment, that would make it more difficult for you. And there isn't any assistance for that. Anywhere where you can see signs that say, okay, if you need assistance to get through security or on the plane, where you feel you could go for that kind of support, at least in this context.
Right. Thank you so much, Kelly. And the context of many countries or developing countries, I'm not sure it is in Korea, Isabel, so feel free to jump in as well. Our social context is not, again, is not built around, or doesn't have people with disabilities in mind, right? Kelly was just mentioning about this, like, just rushing every day, thinking about us going to market, for example. It's hard because you just don't see, it's not like in the US where you just see everything is organized. No, in Indonesia, thinking about going to Java, you would see a grandma passing and standing in the middle of the road. You would see chicken, you would see, I don't know, pedicab. It is just a very busy street. It is not. And so it's very challenging at like these various different contexts to actually enable multiple sort of like representations or diversity of bodies, just bodies, not talking about mind, just bodies up to be there. So any other thoughts and like some sort of like examples of these cultural barriers or cultural sort of how ableism permeates in our cultures every day?
I can share something. I think that kind of similar to what you all are talking about busyness. I think, and we're talking about cultural context. So I myself am an American. I also didn't mention in my introduction that I'm not Korean. I am Hmong, so my parents are from Laos, Southeast Asia. But I do pass here. So it does kind of change my experience here in terms of like what I look like in my lived experience. But talking about Korean culture, there is a culture of like bali, which is like hurry, hurry. So everybody's very busy. And I think Korea actually has done not enough because I do know people who do have disabilities and they do have difficulties here, but they have advanced a bit in terms of kind of the administrative things that they do at the government level. And so there are things kind of like buses that will lower for people who have a disability or who are elderly and things like that. But I was just reading an article recently that was talking about how people with disabilities will not use like those types of buses because the buses have to hurry in order for everybody to get to work on time. So, those same people also have to go to work at the same time, but they're not able to use that. Right. Or even like on the subway, for instance, we have seats for the disabled, those with injuries, those who are pregnant. And all the time I see like people sitting there that shouldn't be sitting there. For instance, like a man will be sitting there and it's like the pregnancy seat. And it's like, well, clearly it doesn't seem like you would be able to be a person who could be sitting here. And sometimes like they will not want to get up unless, unless somebody's clearly pregnant is standing in front of them. And by that, I mean like about to burst, but not like in the early stages of pregnancy, which, as we all know, can look different for every single woman. But that's just an example, I think, that I see every day for like seats that are kind of there for people with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. I think you pinpointed a good sort of like this cultural practices, right? You have a sign over there, but it's like policies is there, but then implementation is a different thing, So thank you. I have Maya, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Following up on Kelly's and Isabel's stories. So on Kelly's point, it's interesting that in your case, it's because of your physical, I shouldn't say impairment, but it was just that at that time there was some physical
you can say
difficulties. Yeah. And what I'm thinking about here is what about places where they are cigarette smoking, where say in a restaurant, and then you have a server who's pregnant but having to inhale that cigarette smoke all the time. And I can still remember the times when in elevator people smoke, and so the others, the non-smokers, have to inhale that. or in public transportation, for instance. So that's, I guess, one, would that be considered as ableism as well? I mean, it seems that inhaling other people's smoke, which could lead to difficulties, but not seen, obviously.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
So I
that's,
think, sorry, but Maya, I
No,
think
that's all right.
you were saying, I think I'm hearing the practice of dominant culture, right?
Okay.
And so, right, the practice of dominant culture, it could come in from of ableism, it could come in from of patriarchy, it could come in from of racism, kind of from any other cultures that actually it's okay if this is what people in power or that's what the dominant practices are. Like in Indonesia, it's like everyone just smoke and then, you know, it's, I don't know, it's just okay. But thank you for giving the example. I think one of the examples that I have in mind is also like representations in our media, for example, in our Instagram or in our soap operas and things like that. Do we see people with disabilities represented? Right? Why we don't see people with disabilities represented? Why do we see that like in like some stand-up comedies and things like that, people tend to like make fun in a demeaning ways of people with disabilities, right? And so that's what like some of our cultural practices, because again, we don't see that, you know, there is a place or that people can with disabilities is just human being and can be like any of us, you know. Another, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna just speed up real quick on, so I mentioned this institutional, I also mentioned cultural sort of practices of ableism, but also there are these like individual practices of ableism, right? And example of individual practice of ableism is that what we call as like inspiration porn, which is like you see people with disabilities like, oh my God, God is so good. You know, you think that, oh, that person inspires you because they are weak. And so if they are weak, then I am the strong, or I am the full body and like quote unquote sane mind could do better, you know? And so those are some sort of like, or like, oh, I don't know, you are you know, a person with disabilities could be like a symbol or a source for charity and things like that. Those are like individual practices that we don't know are actually highlighting the notions of ableism. So I'm gonna go back and share my screen again real quick here. All right, so I'm gonna minimize everyone's pictures for now. Right, so there we go. I think I'm almost to the meat of what I want to say to you. So as I mentioned, although many of our examples are actually looking at like feasible physical kind of disabilities, well, not all disabilities are like that. Not all disabilities you can see, right? Most of disabilities actually you cannot see with your bare eyes, right? And I said like there are 15% of the world populations of people with disabilities. Many of them actually do not look like the first row of pictures that you see here, right? And so again, I'm just a disclaimer here that person with disability is just unique, just like any other human being. So I've often heard this saying said that if you've met one person with disability, you've just met one person with disability, right? Meaning that not everyone with dyslexia cannot read, for example, or not everyone with autism actually do not know how to say their names and things like that. These ways of like stereotypical thinking, right? And so for the purpose of our talk today, and I'm hoping that this is going to be helpful, is that I'm going to look at diversity within this not so feasible sort of disability groups here. So you probably have heard the term neurodiversity. Give me 1 second, sorry. All right, sorry. So you probably have heard the term neurodiversity, right? And so neurodiversity is a pretty recent new term, but what it's trying to say here is that the human, it's normal to have varieties in the way that the brain works, right? So there is neurotypical, which is sort of like standard, quote unquote, normal type of brain thinking, which is normal people, quote unquote, right? But there is what we call as neurodivergent, right? Such as we have people with autism, people with learning disability, people, and by learning disability here, we can have like more specific like dyslexia, dyscalculia, for example, people with developmental delay, people with intellectual disabilities such as Down syndrome, right? People with Tourette syndrome, people with ADHD and things like that. There is nothing wrong with the way that their brain works. It is just the nature of their brain, hence you cannot cure them, right? And so again, the term of neurodiversity really places human sort of different functions of human in particular brain as just a natural and a normal, and that's just the spectrum of human differences, right? So I'm not gonna go details into just what ADHD, autism, LD, or learning disability, developmental delay is, just for the sake of time. But I think I'm gonna like offer some sort of thoughts, and they're not gonna be an exhaustive list. And again, I come from the perspective of being a researcher and a teacher, and I'm sure that you all have your epistemological as well as real life experiences, right? And so feel free to also share what you have in mind in terms of like changing these cultures of ableism in the way that your respective institutions work. And the reason why I mentioned this change the cultures of ableism is because of, again, like I mentioned earlier, when we apply or when we create scholarship, right? Or when we publish our website, for example, do we always have people with disabilities or people with various abilities in mind, right? And so, so one thing that I have here is that perhaps we could rethink our institutional current practices. What I mean by that is that how do we reach out to our potential sort of like applicants, right? If we go to high schools, for example, in the context of Indonesia and some other countries I know are also like that, in terms of like schools are segregated based on different types of disabilities, right? Now we have like inclusive schools, but that happens alongside segregated schools. Now, when we reach out for our programs, for example, we reach out to high schools, do we go to schools of folks with different kinds of abilities, folks who are neurodivergent, right? Folks who are blind, for example, or deaf. What kind of what are we looking for? What standards are we looking for when we go reach out to our potential applicants, right? How are our selections and recruitment processes done? How are our interviews included or conducted and things like that, right? So one thing that I have in mind here is cast a wider net kind of thing, because if like in the context of Indonesia, for example, the schools are not inclusive just yet to, like, for example, we are heading there, but we are not yet there, right? And so if we go, what does it mean if we go only, for example, to high schools for that are inclusive, or high schools that are serving the majority of normal bodied and mind students, right? What do we include, what do we exclude, and things like that. When you go to, like, for example, higher education institutions, whom do you see in your audience, right? Do you see only people with complete body functions, right? So just rethink, because again, this isn't a culture of a century or so. This has been since the world is made, right? And so it's gonna take a long time to actually do this change, because again, it's not yet the part of our blood and skin. All right. And so the second thing that I have in mind here is this: evaluate your screening criteria and the process. And by what I mean by that is that people with disabilities or people who are neurodivergent might not be, what you call it, those kind of like traditional standardized forms of, like, for example, writing something, a paper, or writing, I don't know, publications and things like that, or interviews. They might not work so much for people who are neurodivergent. So for example, individual with autism, some people with autism, for example, interviews could be very daunting, right? And so that could sort of discourage them from coming up to interviews and things like that, because that is just not their nature. And then if we're looking for someone, for example, who have good, I don't know, interpersonal skills and something like that. For some people with autism, you know, they can be good at social interaction, but for some people with autism, it's just their nature of the way their brain works. They're not gonna be able to form social sort of like norm of interactions the way normal, quote unquote, people perceive social interactions, right? Sometimes also I think our standard sort of like criteria or selection might centralize around what we call as like logocentric sort of notion, which means like, you know, some people with neurodivergent are very good, like creative thinking, think out of the box and things like that, but they might not be so much good at like certain types of writing formats, right? And what does it mean when we emphasis on one standard of ways of expression, such as, you know, writing something? What do we include? What do we exclude, and things like that? Another thing that I have here is, again, and this is related to the previous one, is this rethinking interviews. Because as I mentioned, for individuals with neurodivergent, like, you know, sorry, before I got to that, physical type or feasible types of disabilities, sometimes you can help people navigate that. Like, for example, someone with wheelchair, if you know, elevator, that person can access the interviews. But for someone who are neurodivergent, who are not so much, their disability is not so much feasible, right? It's not very, I don't know, they might not have equal access as other people do, right? And so I don't know, again, because I come from this different perspective, and what I'm saying probably are the ideal, and I don't know if they might be practical yet. That's why it would be nice if, you know, you could see what might work in your institutions and not, and what would be the cost. And it's not just financial cost, but cultural costs that we have by being exclusive. And so another thing that I think we could do is like think about our websites, for example. This is the culture part. So this is like, for example, looking at our websites and see what like, is our language complicated? Because again, like going back to individuals who are neurodivergent, like say students with autism, or I'm saying students just because I'm teaching students, and usually I teach teacher educators, so I'm saying students, but what I meant is the individuals with autism. So for individuals with autism, for example, understanding like long paragraphs might be challenging, right? And so you, instead of having long paragraphs in jargony manners, you could probably simplify them in like succinct form in bullet points. That could help a lot, actually, and it benefits almost, you know, rather than diving yourself into, or almost everyone, I'm sorry, and rather than, you know, diving yourself into just this long paragraph and try to think of what does it mean to say. But if, you know, you say what you say and make it in a very succinct way, that helps not only people with neurodivergent, but I think it would help everyone as well. Things as simple as font size. If like does it, if you have like certain fonts, sometimes like you have like, you know, those star things, and then you have like some small writing over there, is it accessible by everyone, right? We're thinking about people who are blind, for example, or people with like some sensitive visual impairment, right? Think about our interview questions. For some neurodivergent individuals, things like asking sort of like idiomatic kind of questions, they might not be able to understand that, not because they don't understand, but it's just that their brain is not telling them that this is, you know, what certain sort of like idiomatic or questions meant, right? So think about, again, looking at what your current practices are. How could you make your interview questions, for example, to avoid confusions and just to be able to accommodate multiple sort of the ways that brain works. Another thing that I have here, and you probably have practiced this, is that having your equity, diversity, and inclusion statement in your institutional sort of like formal, either could be websites or emails and things like that. Why? Because this kind of like, and I put one example here, these statements could be encouraging people also to say, okay, I might have this, like I might be diverging from these normal notions of what applicants should be, but seems like some institutions are willing to accommodate and willing to adjust to what I need, right? I mean, that means that you are willing to provide access and opportunities to them, right? And so that could be, that's like small things matter, right? And so having this EDI or EDI statement could be helpful as well. I think I mentioned this. Oh, you're thinking about the color scheme as well. There are actually sources, if you're willing, I'd be happy to share. And like, so things that I have right now, for example, is like block color white and that you have a contrast black writing would be really helpful. If you have something like yellow on top of, I don't know, black, for example, that could be daunting for people with visual impairment one, but people with autism, for example, could also see it could be too much what you call it, sensory stimulating. That's because then there are other parts of the brain got stimulated, and so that is just not sort of encouraging for them to look at the websites. Images are really important as well. Again, and I keep using examples of individuals with disabilities, for example, where words are too kind of like inaccessible to read. Images could actually help them as well to understand the points that you're making. Another thing that I have here is also always, and I'm saying this because apparently this hasn't been done in many practices. So, for example, if you're trying to be inclusive, or if you would like to change, you know, say your website, for example, always have people with multiple disabilities have your platform. And I'm saying this because, like, for example, we have urban planners trying to make sidewalks accessible for you know, blind people or people with wheelchairs and things like that, but they don't have people with wheelchairs or blind people to come and actually try the sidewalk to see whether it's working for them or not. So always have people with disabilities to ask for their feedback, right? Have them to actually test what you have, asking their feedback, right? Or why this isn't work, what can we do to be more inclusive and things like that. What else do I have? I'm just gonna, oops, sorry. So one or two things that I would like to add here is that, and I'm not sure how it would work in terms of Fulbright or MNF requirement, but I always find that providing interview questions ahead of time is always helpful, especially for those who are neurodivergent, right? Because they could see the questions and they could actually, like, for example, if you happen to have like this social specific idiomatic kind of questions, right, then they would be able to actually ask help from someone to see, oh, what do these questions actually mean, right? Because I don't know. And again, you could ask yourself on what is the purpose of interviews, right? Is it like an exam kind of form, whether you test their knowledge, or is it you really want to know the applicant's answers, therefore you want to prepare them to actually come with the answers so that you can select from what they know, not what they don't know, and then you're testing them, kind of thing. Just me being in a job search in academia, I've always find it helpful if the institutions, and I would make a call and ask institutions if they can provide me interview questions ahead of time, right? And that also eases nervousness and things like that. What else did I want to say? So for individuals with neurodivergence, say individuals with autism, for example, being in a different or a new environment is very daunting. And so if they come to a new or individuals who are blind, being in a new setting is just challenging. And therefore it might be also helpful for you to ask like additional supports that they would need. So, and you might not be able to give this to all people, but that is exactly the purpose of being accommodative, is like, you're gonna ask. So one thing that I've seen people do is that this is a generic questions that they ask, but let us know if you need if you need like certain types of accommodations and things like that. So for individuals with visual impairment or blind, is that you can go to this entrance or something like that, and then help them to actually navigate the building first of all, right? And then so that they have like, you know, ease kind of feeling to navigate this new space. For individuals who are neurodivergent or autism, for example, having be aware that certain types of social sort of like skills that you're looking for, such as like being able to navigate emotions under pressures and things like that, that might not work for individuals with autism, because overstimulations could actually lead them to look like angry, for example, or look like not being able to regulate emotion, but actually they're struggling under pressure. And then last one that I have here is social cues, idioms and things like that. Certain kinds of like gestures might, like, you know, you raise your eyebrows, or like you make your eye contact and nod and things like that. Not everyone would understand that as like, I'm counting on you, you know, I'm looking at you, yes, you can do it. For individuals with autism, that is just a nod, and they do not understand what a nod is. And again, I'm saying that this is a spectrum. Not everyone with autism is like that. So the key point is that be clear and succinct in what you want to say what you want to say, and it's literally, right? I think I'm gonna just stop there. I hope this is helpful, and I do welcome you know, questions, comments, and again, since this is a small group, we can have like more intimate conversation kind of. Kelly, I don't know if this is helpful.
Yeah, no, this is it's really wonderful, and it's very helpful for you to give us both a different perspective to think about ableism and how we may not be aware of how we are also sort of utilizing ableist frameworks when we are doing things like interviews or recruitment. I just came through a round of interviews, and some of the things you're saying, I'm thinking, oh, that's a great point that really did not occur to me about how I may be interpreting things, or the way that we're asking questions in a way that may be ableist. And it's just the default mode that we're in. And I think a lot of what you've pointed out about things like providing questions beforehand, making sure that our language is simple on the website, is helpful not only for people with disabilities, both you know, disabilities that we can see and disabilities that we can't, but also for like a lot of our candidates and the people that we're trying to recruit who may have other barriers to understanding the language on websites, or cultural differences when it comes to speaking to people in an interview and things like that. So, you know, it brings home this point that like, we're not just creating these frameworks and offering this support only to quote unquote help or support people with disabilities, but actually it makes it more accessible for a much wider group of people.
Right.
My question, so I really liked your EDI statement that was very clear and just said, look, we are willing to speak about accommodations. I think something that I've struggled with and we've talked about at MNF and with other commissions and posts is that oftentimes there's a real sense of a feeling of taboo that people don't want to disclose to us any, you know, quote unquote problems that they have, because they think that it's going to be held against them somehow in the competition for these scholarships. And this goes for a lot of different kinds of identities, actually. So other than having a really clear EDI statement that says, look, we welcome this and we are happy to discuss accommodations before you come in for the interview, or even if you're getting ready to put in your application online, like you can contact us. Are there other ways that we can communicate that we are open and willing and that we want to accommodate all sorts of people with diverse identities and diverse disabilities outside of, you know, making that statement very obvious on the website that you can think of?
You're right, Kelly, because again, like this is a culture that we're trying to change, right? And stigma and taboos, they are real, right? That's why, like, I think we have this sort of like internalized notion of, because you have disability or you are, I don't know, autistic or you are dyslexia, like forget about applying for Fulbright. Do they get the education that they need first? Right. So forget about that. So that's why I was saying, like, if we go for like example, like high schools and like go to like certain, I don't know, UGM, for example, is that the place where there are a lot of people with disabilities there? So are we open to other types of creativity of mind and bodies other than being able to write X and Y amount of words, papers, and things like that? I don't know, Kelly, that's a good question in terms of not being discriminatory. I think and I go back to this notions of changing cultures, because there is this distrust, right, from the individuals with disabilities themselves and their families, distrust in this, and it's not individual distrust, but this is institutional and historical distrust to see that, well, you all don't include me, I don't have space there, right? And so ways of, I think, just to change the culture, rebuild this trust, right, is that telling them, showing them that, hey, we created this, that we're willing to repair this broken trust. So for example, started with like representations, media, everyone uses media. I would say media representation could be helpful. I don't know. Yeah, well, media is the only thing that I have in mind, but I think my key points is that just rebuild this distrust, right? Yeah, going and visit people, see different types of, but I think, Kelly, this might take multiple sort of like institutional buy-in from different institutions, right? Because this could be something too much of spectrum, in the sense of like, would MNF or would Fulbright be willing to see different types of intellectual expression, right? Not just written publications, but would you be willing to also see different types of intellectual or intelligence, you know, that might not be feasible through 4 years higher education institutions? So it might be an exhaustive list of seeing how we can rebuild the trust, and that could be contextual as well, right? I don't know, Kelly.
Oh, it's definitely not an easy one solution answer, right? Yeah. And I do think everything that you have talked to us about today is really helpful just to get started. As you say, even these small things really matter. And you're right, it's incredibly challenging for many of the contexts across, you know, East Asia and the Pacific and many parts of the world to even access candidates, because yeah, we're recruiting at universities and high schools where they might not even have access. So it goes all the way back down the line to something about the society as well. But I think that everybody at Fulbright is really dedicated to finding ways that we can be more open and inclusive, you know, within the confines of what our program is now, that obviously we're trying to send more for 4-year degrees, but maybe there's other programs that we can build and foster that aren't necessarily just about 4-year degrees. We do have other kinds of exchanges, right? So there's a lot to think about here, but I will stop and let others comment and question too.
Thank you. That was, yeah, food for thought, kind of, thought starters. Yes, and then at the end of the day, what is normal? And we have assumed normal is this way, but nowadays we have to ask ourselves, and I think to Kelly's point, it's a journey of many steps,
Yep.
and multi-layers, and so I guess the question is, and this is just a question thinking out loud, how, what's the first step? What's the 1, 2, 3 for us, for instance, for MNF? Educating ourselves, that's, I think, it's the first step. Raising awareness, being aware that there is no one normal in that sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it's this. What's the 1, 2, 3 next steps for us? But yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry.
So sorry, just to add that to your point about language, the use of language that's easy to understand, say what you mean in that sense. We've taken a step of now using mainly Indonesian in our social media posts. Before that, it was English, and the rationale for English is because, well, we are trying to promote to those who will eventually have to use English every day for their studies, during their grad, during their fellowship. So might as well, get them to be used to the English language. So that was the rationale. But then this idea of being accessible. So we changed our way of communicating, though not on our website. So yeah, there isn't a question yet here, or just comments and thoughts. Big homework for us.
Yeah,
in that sense.
those are great thoughts and great reflections, but Maya, because again, I like that when you say what is normal, right? And again, the problem, disability is not the problem of people who are disabled. Disability is the problem of able-bodied people. It's just a simple matter of we don't know how to make sense of differences. That's it. And that's why we do not provide access, right? Because so yeah, it's our problem. When I say our, is because I identify myself as able-bodied, right? And so I think thinking about what divisions you are at MNF, for example, I think you would know the answer better than I do, right? Because I do not know, the context and the exact work that you do. But something that I have in mind, like you said, is always not just raising awareness, but also how do you make yourself aware? Like be aware, like you said, and then raise awareness. Things as simple as like in your social media, I think Instagram enables this alternative text function, right? Wherein you can describe a picture, and then that text could be read for someone who's blind, for example. Do you practice that and things like that? Have you enabled them? So think about how you could be inclusive for people of multiple skin color, multiple ways of sitting, multiple ways of walking, walks of lives and things like that, right? I think in the context of Indonesia, for example, it has been you know, because this kind of like dominant cultures, this so permeates, you know, our whatever blood and skin. And there are a lot of, like, for example, talks that I've seen that are so much centralized, for example, on Java, right? Or like the representations that you see are like Java, but Indonesia is not just Java, right? And so how could we be more inclusive to people? Because the problem of like dominant culture is not just this ableism, right? But there are also like, Indonesia is just so fast diverse, and I'm so proud that, you know, MNF has been like reaching people in different parts of the Indonesia, like going to Papua, going to different parts of the islands that are just so very hard to access, right? But that is what it's all about, right? Providing access and providing opportunities. If I wasn't in Java, because I grew up in a remote island in the islands of Moluccas, for example, at that time, I've never heard of Fulbright. I didn't know if I could get the opportunity, but because I moved to Java, and that's where the opportunity is concentrated, right? So anyway, I think I'm rambling, but yeah, because I think but Maya and Mita would have a better sense of what can you do given, you know, your context and you know what you do in terms of your specific like job tasks and things like that.
I think we have, well, we've gone a little bit over time, but it's just so nice to have this conversation with you, Dian. Does anybody else have any questions or comments before we wrap up for the evening and let you go on with your morning, Dian? Mita?
My apologies again for being late.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm sorry that we got confused on the time.
No additional comments from me.
Thanks, Mita.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions at this time. I think I'll go back to the rest of my staff, and if you know they have any questions, I'll direct them towards Kelly, and then Deanna can go to you that way. But no, I do want to thank you for talking about a variety of kind of like mindsets, and also I think things that we need to keep in mind, both in recruiting and also when just trying to make things more accessible for everybody. So thank you for, oh yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I have building off of what Isabel said is representation also matters. So like, for example, do our offices have individuals with disabilities in our office, right? So that's one thing. But like, I think we could fall under also like stereotypical thinking, or just thinking that, oh, we need to have diversity and therefore let's have people with disabilities in our office because we need the disability part. I don't think that that's a good practice, right? But I'm sure that there are a lot of people who actually are capable of what they're doing if, you know, we're being inclusive and we're, you know, providing opportunities as well. So yeah, think about our representations in our offices. Do we have individuals with neurodivergence, physical disabilities, for example, in offices? And again, like, this is what I'm saying about distrust, right? Repairing this broken distrust about, you know, that the world is just operating around this able-bodied mind. Anyway, my last note.
Well, thank you so much, Dian. And yeah, you know, it's a point. We don't want to go towards tokenism, but we also have to look at ourselves and what we are, you know, sort of representing to the world in terms of the institutions. So again, thanks so much for all of your helpful input. And it's so wonderful to have this conversation with you and to have our little, a kind of re-meeting of some of the Alumna folks. Again, this is one of those beautiful parts of the Fulbright program. And I'm so glad that we're able to bring you in with your expertise now and to help us. And I hope that you'll be, you know, available in the future. If people are interested in getting more resources from you, or even just sharing these slides around, I think one thing that might be really helpful for posts and commissions to think about is even the process of developing an equity, diversity, and inclusion statement is maybe something that you could help out with too, about how to do that in a way that's inclusive of people with diverse disabilities. So thanks again. I'm going to wrap it up for tonight, and thank you everybody who attended. There will be info about the next EAP occasional seminar on the newsletter as usual, and I will keep you all posted. And once I get this video subtitled and edited up, we will post it on the YouTube page, the EAP Diverse YouTube page. So have a wonderful morning, Dian, and good night to everybody else.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Kelly.
much.
Thank you, Dian. Good
Thank
seeing
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Salam.